long before the pyramids rose from the desert sands, before the Sphinx watched over the Nile. There were civilizations so advanced, so powerful, that time itself has tried to erase them. But one being witnessed it all, Thoth, the god of wisdom, scribe of the gods, keeper of secrets beyond human understanding. Imagine worlds with knowledge far beyond what we know today. Empires with technologies lost to history, cultures that vanished without a trace, and wisdom so dangerous it was hidden from humanity for eons. Thoth saw it, he remembered it, and in whispers, in fragments, he left clues about these forgotten worlds. Tonight, we will journey through the lost civilizations he witnessed, the secrets forgotten by time, and the ancient truths that could change how you see the past, and maybe even the present. Stay close, because every moment you watch, every revelation we uncover, will pull you deeper into a story that spans millennia, and into mysteries that were never meant to be remembered by man. Thoth's eyes stretched across ages, watching cities rise like dreams and collapse like sandcastles at the edge of the tide. He saw towers of crystal that hummed with energy, ships that sailed not on water but on currents of sound, and temples aligned so perfectly with the stars that they seemed to breathe with the cosmos itself. These were not myths to him, they were memories. Yet to us, they are fragments, scattered like broken pottery across the desert of time. Civilizations believed themselves eternal, but eternity belongs only to silence. Floods swallowed continents, earthquakes devoured cities, and the sea claimed empires that thought themselves untouchable. Thoth recorded it all, not in books that could burn, but in symbols, myths, and whispers that would survive long after the stones had crumbled. He knew humanity would forget. He knew that pride would blind kings, greed would corrupt priests, and time would erase names once shouted in triumph. Yet he also knew that seekers would return, curious minds would dig, and fragments of truth would resurface. That is why he left clues, not to preserve the past, but to awaken the future. And so, as we begin this journey, remember, history is not what you were taught in school. It is deeper, stranger, and far more mysterious. The civilizations Thoth witnessed were not primitive, they were advanced beyond imagination. Their secrets were hidden, not because they were false, but because they were too dangerous, too powerful, too transformative for unawakened minds. By the end of this journey, you may never see history or the world around you the same way again. If you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know where you're watching from. Whether it's your couch, your bed, or hiding under the blanket, pretending you're studying, because Thoth is watching. And trust me, he's seen stranger things. Long before scribes pressed reeds into clay, before hieroglyphs danced across temple walls, before the first historian ever dipped a pen into ink, there was knowledge. It did not belong to any one people, nor was it confined to scrolls or monuments. It was older than writing, older than kings, older even than memory itself. This was the wisdom Thoth guarded, truths so ancient that they seemed to exist outside of time, waiting for humanity to rediscover them. Thoth watched as civilizations stumbled upon fragments of this primordial knowledge. They believed themselves to be inventors, yet they were only remembering. Fire was not discovered, it was recalled. Agriculture was not invented, it was remembered. The stars were not charted for the first time. They were recognized as old companions, Humanity was like a child waking from a dream, slowly piecing together truths that had always been there. This knowledge was cosmic in nature. It spoke of vibration, of balance, of the eternal rhythm that binds all things. It whispered that thought shapes reality, that silence holds power, and that the soul is not bound by flesh. These truths were not written in books, but encoded in the very fabric of existence. The ancients who glimpsed them built temples aligned with the stars, monuments that hummed with resonance, and rituals that mirrored the cycles of the cosmos. Yet Thoth knew that humanity was forgetful. Civilizations rose, claimed wisdom as their own, and then collapsed, leaving only fragments behind. Myths became the vessels of memory, carrying echoes of truths too vast to be preserved in stone. Flood stories, tales of golden ages, legends of gods walking among men, all were remnants of knowledge that predates history. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humans believed history began with writing, yet the greatest truths existed long before ink touched parchment. He recorded these truths in symbols, in whispers, in silence, ensuring that seekers across ages could rediscover them. For knowledge is not lost, it is only hidden, waiting for minds ready to awaken. And so, as the sands of time shifted, Thoth remained the eternal witness, guarding wisdom older than history itself, reminding humanity that the past is deeper than records, and that the greatest truths are those that cannot be erased. Long before the Nile became the lifeblood of kingdoms, before pharaohs wore crowns of gold and priests chanted in temples, there were civilizations that thrived in silence, now erased by time. Egypt, as magnificent as it became, was not the beginning, it was an inheritance. Thoth, eternal scribe, watched as worlds older than Egypt rose, flourished, and vanished, leaving behind fragments of wisdom that would later shape the land of the pyramids. He saw cities that shimmered with light long before the first obelisk pierced the sky. Their people understood the stars not as distant fires, but as guides, teachers, and living forces. They aligned their temples with constellations, believing that heaven and earth were mirrors of one another. They spoke of balance, of vibration, of the eternal rhythm that binds all things. These truths were not Egyptian inventions. They were echoes of civilizations long forgotten. Thoth remembered lands swallowed by floods, their monuments dissolved into salt. He recalled mountains that once held temples, now buried beneath forests. He saw cultures that spoke to the cosmos in ways that would later be echoed in Egyptian ritual. Egypt was not the first to honor eternity. It was the heir to a lineage of wisdom stretching back into ages so old they seem like dreams. The priests of Egypt inherited fragments of this ancient knowledge. They built pyramids not as mere tombs, but as echoes of older monuments aligned with cosmic law. They carved hieroglyphs not as inventions, but as continuations of symbols whispered by forgotten worlds. Egypt became the visible face of wisdom, but beneath its grandeur lay the bones of civilizations erased by time. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humanity believed Egypt was the dawn of civilization, yet it was only a sunrise after countless nights. Before Egypt was born, there were empires whose names are lost, whose voices are silent, whose secrets lie buried beneath oceans and deserts. Egypt carried their memory forward, unknowingly preserving fragments of truths too ancient to die. And so, when we gaze upon the pyramids, When we marvel at the Sphinx, we are not seeing the beginning of history. We are seeing the continuation of a story far older, a story Thoth remembered, a story whispered by civilizations that lived and vanished long before Egypt was born. Long before the Nile carved its path through Egypt, before Mesopotamia raised its ziggurats, there were worlds that thrived in silence and brilliance, worlds now erased by the waters of time. Thoth, eternal scribe and witness of eternity, watched as these civilizations rose with pride and fell with sorrow. Their monuments swallowed by oceans, their voices drowned beneath waves. He remembered lands where towers of crystal shimmered in the sun, where temples aligned perfectly with the stars, and where knowledge flowed like rivers through the minds of their people. These civilizations believed themselves eternal, yet eternity belongs only to silence. Floods came, sudden and merciless, sweeping away cities that had stood for centuries. The sea claimed their streets, their libraries, their monuments, leaving behind only whispers carried in myths. The Atlanteans were among them, a people who harnessed energies that modern science still struggles to imagine. They built ships that sailed not on water, but on currents of sound, and they spoke of harmony between man and cosmos. Yet pride grew, balance faltered, and the waters rose. Their towers became reefs, their wisdom dissolved into salt, and their voices became legends told around fires. Thoth also remembered Lemuria, a land of vast mountains and endless seas, where people believed they could speak to the earth itself. They sang to volcanoes, whispered to forests, and lived in rhythm with nature. But the waters came for them too, swallowing their lands, scattering their people, and leaving only fragments of memory buried beneath waves. Civilizations lost to floods were not erased completely. Their echoes survived in myths of deluges, in stories of gods punishing humanity, in tales of golden ages drowned by divine wrath. These myths are not mere fantasy. They are fragments of memory, distorted by time, but carrying the truth of worlds that once existed. Thoth recorded it all, not in books that could burn, but in symbols, in silence, in whispers that would survive long after the waters receded. He knew humanity would forget, but he also knew that seekers would return, curious minds would dig, and fragments of truth would resurface. The floods erased civilizations, but they could not erase memory itself. And so, when we hear stories of great floods, of lands swallowed by oceans, of gods who drowned the world, we are hearing echoes of civilizations lost to the waters of time. Thoth saw them, remembered them, and preserved their secrets, waiting for humanity to awaken and listen. Long before scribes etched symbols into clay, before priests carved hieroglyphs into stone, there were worlds that thrived in silence and brilliance, worlds that left no records behind. Thoth, eternal scribe and witness of eternity, watched them rise with pride and fall with sorrow, their stories erased not by malice but by time itself. These civilizations were not primitive, they were advanced, filled with knowledge that would seem miraculous even today. Yet, when they vanished, they left behind no scrolls, no monuments, no inscriptions to tell their tale. Thoth remembered cities that glittered with light, their towers humming with energies now forgotten. He saw people who spoke to the stars, who understood the rhythms of the cosmos, who lived in harmony with forces modern science still struggles to explain. But when floods came, when earthquakes shattered their foundations, when the sea swallowed their lands, their wisdom dissolved into silence. Without records, Their memory became myth, their truth became legend, and their existence faded into whispers. The irony was not lost on Thoth. Humanity often believes that what is written is what is real, yet the greatest civilizations left no words behind. Their stories survive only in fragments, in myths of golden ages, in tales of gods walking among men, in legends of lands swallowed by oceans. These are not fantasies. They are echoes of worlds erased by time, distorted by memory, and disguised as stories. Thoth recorded them in silence, preserving their essence in symbols and whispers. He knew that humanity would forget, but he also knew that seekers would return. Curious minds would dig, and fragments of truth would resurface. Worlds without records were not truly lost. They were hidden, waiting for those who could see beyond the veil of myth. And so, when we hear stories of lands that vanished, of civilizations erased without trace, we are hearing echoes of truth. Thoth saw them, remembered them, and preserved their secrets, waiting for humanity to awaken and listen. For the greatest civilizations are not those remembered in books, but those that live on in silence, carried by the eternal witness of time. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that the most powerful truths were never shouted from rooftops or carved boldly into stone. They were whispered in shadows, hidden in symbols, and passed from teacher to student in silence. Sacred knowledge was not meant for the unprepared. It was guarded carefully, concealed within rituals, and disguised in myths so that only those with awakened minds could grasp its meaning. In the temples of forgotten worlds, initiates were taught that silence itself was a vessel of wisdom. To remain quiet was not weakness, but strength. Words could scatter power, but silence could concentrate it. The greatest lessons were not spoken aloud, but revealed in stillness, when the mind was calm enough to hear the subtle rhythm of the cosmos. Thoth recorded these truths, knowing that silence was the safest guardian of wisdom. Civilizations rose and fell, yet the sacred knowledge endured because it was hidden. Priests cloaked truths in allegories, embedding cosmic laws in myths of gods and heroes. Symbols carved into walls were not mere decorations. They were codes, waiting for seekers to unlock them. Even when floods erased cities and empires crumbled into dust, the wisdom survived in silence, carried forward by those who listened. Thoth understood that humanity was not always ready for the full weight of truth. Knowledge of the soul's immortality, of thought's creative power, of the eternal cycles of time, these were dangerous in the hands of the unawakened. So he ensured that wisdom was passed quietly, preserved in fragments, waiting for those who had proven discipline and humility. And so, silence became the bridge between ages. It carried truths across centuries, protecting them from corruption, preserving them for seekers who would one day rediscover them. Thoth's lesson was clear. Sacred knowledge is not lost, it is hidden, waiting in silence, waiting for those who are ready to hear. Long before crowns gleamed in the sun and pharaohs claimed divine authority, humanity lived in an age without rulers. It was a time when people were guided not by kings, but by rhythms of nature, by the rising of stars, by the cycles of the moon and the turning of seasons. Thoth, eternal scribe, watched this age with quiet fascination, for it was a world where wisdom was shared, not hoarded, and where power was measured not in armies but in harmony. In this forgotten era, communities gathered around rivers and mountains, believing that the earth itself was their teacher. They spoke to winds, listened to forests, and honored silence as a source of strength. There were no thrones, no palaces, no monuments to vanity. Instead, there were circles of seekers, initiates, who studied the cosmos, who learned that thought shapes reality, and who lived in balance with the eternal rhythm of existence. Thoth recorded their ways, knowing that this age would vanish once ambition awoke. For when humanity discovered crowns, when rulers claimed divine right, the age of balance gave way to the age of hierarchy. Kings rose, pharaohs declared themselves gods, and wisdom became guarded, hidden behind temple walls. The simplicity of the age before rulers was lost, replaced by grandeur and pride. Yet fragments of that earlier wisdom survived. Egypt inherited rituals that echoed older practices, aligning temples with stars, honoring silence, and preserving cosmic law. The priests remembered what the people had forgotten, that before kings there was balance, before pharaohs there was harmony, before crowns there was silence. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humanity believed civilization began with rulers, yet its truest wisdom was born in the age before them. The lesson was clear. Power does not create wisdom, and crowns do not guarantee truth. The age before kings and pharaohs reminds us that the greatest civilizations are not built on thrones, but on harmony with the eternal rhythm of time. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, watched as cities rose with brilliance and fell with silence, their monuments swallowed by the earth and their streets drowned beneath the sea. These were not small villages forgotten by chance, but vast empires, bustling with life, filled with temples, markets, and towers that touched the sky. Yet time, indifferent and patient, claimed them all. He remembered cities that glittered with crystal towers, their people convinced they had mastered eternity. They aligned their temples with stars, believing themselves in harmony with the cosmos. But when the waters rose, when earthquakes shattered their foundations, when the sea surged with relentless force, their pride dissolved into salt. Streets became reefs, monuments became ruins, and voices became whispers carried by waves. Other cities were swallowed by the earth itself. Forests grew over temples, mountains buried shrines, deserts consumed palaces. What had once been centers of wisdom became hidden chambers beneath soil and stone. Generations passed, and humanity forgot. Myths of golden ages replaced memory, and legends of gods walking among men became the only echoes of these vanished worlds. Thoth recorded it all, amused at the irony. Humanity believed permanence was carved in stone, yet stone itself crumbled. They believed memory was secured in monuments, yet monuments toppled. He knew that silence was the true guardian of wisdom, for even when cities vanished, fragments of their knowledge survived, hidden in myths, preserved in rituals, waiting for seekers to rediscover them. And so, when we hear stories of lands swallowed by oceans, of temples buried beneath deserts, of cities lost to forests, we are hearing echoes of truth. Thoth saw them, remembered them, and preserved their secrets, waiting for humanity to awaken and listen. For the greatest civilizations are not those remembered in books, but those hidden beneath earth and sea, carried by the eternal witness of time. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that civilizations were not sustained by armies or monuments, but by law. Not the laws written by kings, but the deeper laws woven into the fabric of the cosmos. These were truths that governed balance, vibration, and the eternal rhythm of existence. The keepers of cosmic law were not rulers draped in gold, but seekers, priests, and sages who understood that harmony was the foundation of all life. In forgotten worlds, these keepers taught that thought shapes reality, that silence holds power, and that every action ripples outward into eternity. They were guardians of wisdom, ensuring that knowledge was passed only to those prepared to wield it responsibly. Their temples were not places of worship alone, but schools of initiation, where seekers learned discipline, patience, and humility before touching the deeper truths. Thoth watched them carefully, recording their teachings in symbols and whispers. He knew that cosmic law was eternal, but humanity was forgetful. Civilizations rose, claimed wisdom as their own, and then collapsed when pride and greed disrupted balance. The keepers of cosmic law tried to preserve harmony, but time and ambition often drowned their voices. Yet, fragments of their teachings survived. Egypt inherited rituals aligned with stars, myths that encoded cosmic truths, and ceremonies that echoed older ages. The priests of Egypt became heirs to the keepers of cosmic law, continuing their work in silence, guarding wisdom from corruption. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humanity often believed that kings and pharaohs held ultimate power, yet the true guardians of civilization were those who listened to silence, who honored balance, who carried cosmic law across centuries. Their names may be forgotten, their temples buried, but their wisdom endures, waiting for seekers to rediscover it. The lesson is clear. Civilizations rise and fall, but cosmic law remains. It is the rhythm beneath all things, the balance that sustains existence, the truth that cannot be erased. The keepers of cosmic law were its guardians, and Thoth, eternal witness, ensured their voices would never be lost to time. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, watched with quiet patience as civilizations rose with brilliance and fell into silence. He knew that their disappearance was not always the result of catastrophe alone. Floods, earthquakes, and wars played their part, but the deeper reason these worlds were forgotten lay in humanity itself. People forget not because memory is stolen, but because pride blinds them, noise drowns them, and time erases what they refuse to preserve. He saw empires that believed themselves eternal, convinced their monuments would outlast the stars. Yet when their towers crumbled, when their libraries burned, when their rituals faded, the people who came after chose not to remember. They built new cities on old ruins, new myths over old truths, and declared themselves the beginning of history. In doing so, they buried the past beneath layers of silence. Thoth understood the irony. Humanity often believes that what is written is what is real. Yet the greatest civilizations left no records, or their records were destroyed. Myths became the vessels of memory, carrying fragments of truth disguised as stories of gods, floods, and golden ages. These myths survived, but their meaning was lost, leaving only echoes of worlds erased by time. Another reason these civilizations were forgotten was fear. Knowledge, too powerful, too dangerous, was hidden deliberately. Priests cloaked truths in allegories, ensuring that only initiates could understand. When empires collapsed, the guardians of wisdom vanished, and the secrets they carried dissolved into silence. What remained was mystery, fragments that future generations dismissed as fantasy. Thoth recorded it all, amused at humanity's forgetfulness. He knew that civilizations are not truly lost. They are hidden, waiting for seekers to rediscover them. The forgetting was not a failure, but part of the rhythm of time. For wisdom must be earned, not inherited blindly. And so, civilizations were forgotten, not because they lacked greatness, but because humanity chose to forget, chose to silence, chose to bury. Thoth, eternal witness, preserved their memory, waiting for the day when seekers would awaken and listen once more. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, was not merely a witness to the rise and fall of civilizations. He was their guardian. His task was not to preserve monuments or protect cities, but to safeguard memory itself. For Thoth understood that when empires collapsed, when floods erased lands, when silence swallowed voices, the only thing that endured was remembrance. Without memory, wisdom would vanish completely, and humanity would wander blind through the ages. He carried this responsibility with patience. While kings boasted of their victories and priests guarded their temples, Thoth quietly recorded the deeper truths, the rhythm of the cosmos, the laws of balance, the lessons learned from pride and collapse. He knew that history written by mortals was fragile, easily distorted by ambition or erased by time. His memory, however, was eternal, untouched by floods or fire. Thoth's role was not to interfere, but to ensure that fragments of wisdom survived. He hid truths in myths, encoded them in symbols, and whispered them into rituals that would outlast empires. Egypt inherited much of this hidden memory, weaving it into hieroglyphs, ceremonies, and cosmic alignments. Yet, even Egypt was only a custodian, carrying forward fragments of civilizations far older. Humanity often forgets, but Thoth never did. He remembered the cities swallowed by oceans, the temples buried beneath forests, the seekers who honored silence, and the rulers who fell to pride. His memory was the bridge between ages, ensuring that wisdom was never truly lost, only hidden. And so, Thoth became the guardian of memory, the eternal scribe who carried the stories of forgotten worlds across millennia. His lesson was clear. Civilizations may vanish, monuments may crumble, but memory endures. It is the thread that binds past to present, the whisper that guides seekers, the eternal record kept by the God of wisdom himself. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, understood that not all wisdom was meant to be shared openly. Some truths were so powerful, so transformative, that in the wrong hands they could bring ruin instead of enlightenment. Civilizations that rose with brilliance often fell because they misused knowledge, twisting it into tools of domination, greed, and destruction. And so, much of what they discovered was deliberately hidden, preserved only in fragments, or erased entirely from human memory. He remembered worlds where people harnessed energies that could move mountains, heal the sick, and even bend the fabric of reality itself. These civilizations believed themselves invincible, yet their pride led them to use such powers recklessly. Towers collapsed, seas rose, and entire continents vanished beneath waves. The wisdom that had once promised harmony became the very cause of their downfall. Thoth knew that humanity was not always ready for such truths. Knowledge of the soul's immortality, of Thoth's creative force, of the cycles that bind time and existence, these were dangerous when wielded without balance. If given to rulers hungry for power or priests blinded by ambition, they could enslave rather than liberate. And so, the guardians of wisdom cloaked these truths in allegories, embedding them in myths, hiding them in symbols that only the disciplined could unlock. Civilizations collapsed, but fragments of their dangerous knowledge survived. Egypt inherited pieces of it, weaving them into rituals and hieroglyphs, disguising cosmic truths as stories of gods and heroes. The myths were not fantasy, they were veils, protecting wisdom from misuse, ensuring that only seekers with patience and humility could glimpse the deeper meaning. Thoth's role was clear. He preserved memory, but he also protected humanity from itself. He ensured that knowledge too dangerous to preserve openly was hidden in silence, waiting for those who were ready. For wisdom is not lost, it is guarded, concealed, until the time is right. And so, the greatest truths remain unseen, not because they are forgotten, but because they are too powerful to be revealed. Thoth, eternal witness, holds them still, waiting for the day when humanity can awaken without destroying itself. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, watched as civilizations that once dazzled with brilliance crumbled into silence. These were not simple societies. They were advanced worlds, filled with technologies and wisdom that would seem miraculous even today. Towers of crystal hummed with energy, temples aligned perfectly with the stars, and healers worked with vibrations that touched the soul. Yet, despite their greatness, they collapsed, leaving behind only fragments and myths. The cause was rarely nature alone. Floods and earthquakes played their part, but the deeper reason was imbalance. Pride grew too strong, greed spread like fire, and wisdom was twisted into tools of domination. Civilizations that had once lived in harmony with cosmic law began to ignore it, believing themselves invincible. Thoth recorded their downfall, knowing that the misuse of knowledge was always the seed of collapse. He remembered Atlantis, where power was harnessed, not for balance, but for ambition. Their towers glittered, their ships sailed on currents of sound, yet their pride led them to destruction. He recalled Lemuria, where harmony with nature gave way to arrogance, and the sea claimed their lands. He saw countless other worlds vanish, each convinced they would endure forever, each undone by their own blindness. The collapse of advanced ancient worlds was not the end of their wisdom. Fragments survived, carried in myths, preserved in rituals, hidden in symbols. Egypt inherited pieces of this knowledge, weaving them into ceremonies and hieroglyphs. The echoes of lost science and wisdom became the foundation of later civilizations, though much was misunderstood or forgotten. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humanity often believes collapse means failure, yet it is part of the rhythm of time. Civilizations rise, shine brightly, and then fade, leaving lessons for those who come after. The advanced worlds may have vanished, but their memory endures, waiting for seekers to rediscover the truths hidden in silence. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, remembered civilizations whose brilliance was not measured in monuments alone, but in the sciences and wisdom they carried. These were worlds where knowledge reached heights that seem impossible to modern minds. They understood energies that flowed through the earth, vibrations that shaped reality, and alignments of stars that guided the rhythm of life. Their discoveries were not crude beginnings, but refined sciences that echoed the laws of the cosmos itself. He saw healers who worked with sound, restoring balance through vibrations that touched both body and soul. He watched architects who built temples aligned so perfectly with celestial movements that they became living instruments of harmony. He recorded engineers who harnessed forces of nature, creating machines powered not by fire or metal, but by resonance and light. These sciences were not myths, they were realities, now forgotten, buried beneath floods and silence. Yet, when civilizations collapsed, their wisdom dissolved into fragments. Myths carried echoes of their discoveries, disguising truths as stories of gods and miracles. Rituals preserved fragments of their sciences, though their deeper meaning was lost. Egypt inherited pieces of this ancient knowledge, weaving them into ceremonies, hieroglyphs, and cosmic alignments. The pyramids themselves became echoes of older sciences, monuments that still whisper of forgotten truths. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humanity often believes progress is linear, that knowledge grows steadily from primitive beginnings to modern brilliance. Yet the echoes of lost science remind us that wisdom is cyclical. Civilizations rise, discover truths, misuse them, and collapse, leaving fragments for future generations to rediscover. What seems miraculous today may only be the faint shadow of what was once known, and so the echoes of lost science and wisdom remain, hidden in myths, preserved in ruins, waiting for seekers to listen. Thoth, eternal witness, recorded them all, ensuring that even when civilizations vanished, their brilliance would not be erased completely. For wisdom is never truly lost. It lingers like an echo, calling across time. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that when civilizations vanished, their wisdom did not disappear entirely. Instead, it survived in fragments, carried forward as myths, legends, and stories told around fires. To the unawakened, these tales seemed like fantasy. But to those who listened carefully, they were echoes of truths far older than the civilizations we know today. He remembered how floods that swallowed continents became stories of divine wrath, how towers that touched the sky became legends of pride punished by the heavens, and how golden ages of harmony became myths of gods walking among men. These were not inventions of imagination. They were distorted memories of real worlds, encoded in allegory, so that fragments of wisdom could survive collapse. Thoth smiled at the irony. Humanity often dismissed myths as superstition, yet within them lay the keys to forgotten ages. The epic of Gilgamesh, the tales of Atlantis, the flood stories told across cultures, all carried whispers of civilizations erased by time. Egypt itself inherited myths that hinted at older worlds, embedding cosmic truths in stories of Ra, Osiris, and Isis. These were not mere deities, but symbols of eternal cycles, echoes of wisdom passed down from ages long forgotten. The myths endured because they were disguised. Priests cloaked truths in allegories, ensuring that only seekers with patience and humility could unlock their meaning. To the masses, they were stories of gods and heroes. To initiates, they were lessons in cosmic law, reminders of civilizations that had risen and fallen before. And so, myths became the bridge between ages. They carried fragments of truth across centuries, protecting wisdom from corruption, preserving memory when monuments crumbled. Thoth, eternal witness, ensured that even when civilizations vanished, their voices would survive in story. The lesson is clear. Myths are not fantasy. They are echoes of older ages, whispers of forgotten worlds, fragments of wisdom waiting for seekers to rediscover. To dismiss them is to silence history. To listen is to awaken to truths far deeper than time itself. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that when civilizations collapsed, not everything was erased. Floods swallowed cities, earthquakes shattered temples, and fires consumed libraries, yet fragments of wisdom always survived. What endured was not the grandeur of monuments or the pride of kings, but the subtle threads of knowledge woven into myth, ritual, and silence. He remembered how symbols carved into stone outlasted empires, carrying truths disguised as decoration. He saw rituals passed from generation to generation, their deeper meaning forgotten by the masses but preserved in form. Even when towers crumbled and palaces vanished beneath deserts, the rhythm of cosmic law endured, hidden in stories of gods, floods, and golden ages. These fragments were not accidents, they were seeds, planted deliberately by priests and sages who knew that wisdom must survive collapse. Egypt became one of the great inheritors of these fragments. Its temples aligned with stars, its hieroglyphs encoded cosmic truths, and its myths carried echoes of older worlds. The pyramids themselves were more than tombs. They were monuments to survival, vessels of knowledge that whispered of civilizations far older than Egypt. Thoth smiled at the resilience of wisdom. Humanity often believes destruction means loss, yet what survives is often the most important. Pride, wealth, and power vanish, but truths endure in silence, waiting for seekers to rediscover them. Myths, symbols, and rituals became the guardians of memory, ensuring that even when civilizations fell, their essence lived on. And so, what survived the destruction was not the noise of empires, but the whispers of wisdom. It lingered in myths told across cultures, in alignments of temples with stars, in fragments of rituals that still echo today. Thoth, eternal witness, preserved these remnants, ensuring that humanity would one day awaken to the truths hidden beneath the ruins of time. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, watched as fragments of wisdom from collapsed civilizations flowed into Egypt, shaping it into one of the greatest inheritors of ancient knowledge. Egypt did not invent its brilliance in isolation. It gathered echoes from worlds long forgotten, weaving them into temples, rituals, and myths that carried truths across millennia. He remembered how priests of older ages encoded cosmic laws in symbols, how seekers preserved fragments of wisdom in rituals, and how myths disguised truths in stories of gods and floods. When those civilizations fell, their fragments did not vanish. They traveled with survivors, carried in memory, whispered in silence, and eventually found fertile ground along the Nile. Egypt became the vessel, the guardian of knowledge, too precious to be lost. The pyramids themselves were monuments to inheritance. Their alignments with stars echoed older sciences. Their geometry whispered of cosmic laws, and their silence preserved truths that had survived floods and collapse. Egyptian myths of Ra, Osiris, and Isis were not mere inventions. They were echoes of older stories, symbols that carried fragments of wisdom from civilizations erased by time. Thoth recorded it all, ensuring that Egypt became the bridge between ages. Its priests guarded rituals that preserved cosmic harmony. Its scribes encoded truths in hieroglyphs, and its temples became living instruments of balance. Egypt inherited not only fragments of knowledge, but also the responsibility to protect them, to cloak them in allegory, and to pass them forward to seekers who would one day rediscover their meaning. And so, Egypt stood as heir to forgotten worlds, carrying wisdom across centuries. It did not create all its brilliance anew. It inherited, preserved, and transformed. Thoth, eternal witness, ensured that the memory of older civilizations lived on through Egypt. waiting for humanity to awaken and listen. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, often reflected on the irony of human memory. Civilizations rose with brilliance long before the first chronicles were etched into clay or carved into stone. Yet humanity insists that history begins only when writing appears. In truth, countless ages had already passed, ages of wisdom, discovery, and collapse, before scribes recorded their first words. He remembered worlds where knowledge flowed freely, where temples aligned with stars, and where seekers understood cosmic law without needing scrolls or monuments. These civilizations thrived, but when they fell, their memory dissolved into silence. What survived were myths, rituals, and fragments disguised as stories of gods and floods. Yet because they left no written records, humanity dismissed them as fantasy, declaring history to begin far later than it truly did. Thoth smiled at the arrogance of this belief. Writing is not the birth of history. It is only one way of preserving memory. The true record lies in silence, in myths that carry echoes of forgotten worlds, in ruins buried beneath oceans and deserts. To say history begins with writing is to ignore the vast ages that came before, ages where wisdom was lived rather than written. Egypt itself was heir to this forgotten truth. Its priests knew that their rituals and myths carried fragments of older civilizations. They understood that their own brilliance was not the beginning, but a continuation. Yet even Egypt, with its monuments and hieroglyphs, could not prevent humanity from forgetting that history stretches far beyond its records. And so, history begins too late because humanity chooses to measure memory by writing alone. Civilizations without scrolls are dismissed, their wisdom silenced, their voices erased. Thoth, eternal witness, preserved their stories, ensuring that seekers would one day realize that history is far older than the books that claim to contain it. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that the collapse of civilizations was not merely tragedy, it was instruction. Each forgotten world carried lessons, etched not in stone but in silence, waiting for seekers to rediscover them. The ruins, the myths, the fragments of wisdom that survived destruction were not accidents. They were reminders of truths humanity must learn if it is to endure. He remembered how pride led empires to ruin, how greed consumed harmony, and how knowledge misused became the seed of collapse. The lesson was clear. Wisdom without balance becomes destruction. Civilizations that thrived in harmony with cosmic law flourished, but those that turned knowledge into tools of domination fell swiftly, leaving only whispers behind. Another lesson was humility. Forgotten worlds remind us that no empire is eternal, no monument indestructible, no crown invincible. Time erases pride, but it preserves truth. The greatest civilizations are not those that build the tallest towers, but those that honor silence, balance, and the eternal rhythm of existence. Thoth also saw the importance of memory. Myths, rituals, and symbols carried fragments of wisdom across centuries, ensuring that even when cities vanished, their essence survived. The lesson here is that truth cannot be destroyed. It can only be hidden, waiting for seekers to awaken and listen. And so, the forgotten worlds teach us resilience. They remind us that collapse is not the end, but part of the rhythm of time. They show that wisdom must be earned, not inherited blindly, and that silence often holds more truth than words. Thoth, eternal witness, preserved these lessons, ensuring that humanity would one day awaken to them. The forgotten worlds are not failures. They are teachers, whispering across ages, guiding seekers toward balance, humility, and the eternal law of the cosmos. Thoth, eternal scribe of the gods, knew that time was both a creator and a destroyer. Civilizations rose with brilliance, their voices echoing across lands and seas. Yet, when they fell, what remained was not noise, but silence. This silence was not empty, it was filled with memory, with whispers of forgotten worlds, with lessons waiting to be heard by those who listened closely. He remembered cities swallowed by oceans, temples buried beneath deserts, and libraries consumed by fire. Their monuments crumbled, their voices faded, but silence endured. In that silence lingered fragments of wisdom, myths disguised as stories, rituals preserved without meaning, symbols carved into stone that still whispered of cosmic law. Time erased pride and power, but it could not erase truth. Silence became the guardian of memory, holding secrets until seekers were ready to rediscover them. Thoth understood that silence was not absence, but presence. It carried the rhythm of the cosmos, the lessons of forgotten worlds, and the eternal reminder that all things rise and fall. Civilizations may vanish, but silence remains, waiting patiently, holding wisdom in its quiet embrace. And so, the silence left behind by time is not something to fear. It is a gentle reminder that memory endures, that wisdom lingers, and that truth is never truly lost. Thoth, eternal witness, preserved this silence, ensuring that humanity would one day awaken to its whispers. Now, as the story drifts into stillness, let the silence of time wrap around you like a soft blanket. The forgotten worlds rest, their voices quiet, their wisdom waiting. Close your eyes, listen to the hush of eternity, and let the echoes fade into dreams. Good night.